A crumpled body on the wet pavement usually draws a crowd, but outside the glass walls of Café Blanc, it only drew disgusted stares. Patrons stepped over the frail woman shivering in the sleet, pulling their cashmere coats tighter to avoid the inconvenience of human suffering. They laughed when a tired waitress dropped her serving tray to drag the woman inside. They stopped laughing when a fleet of matte black SUVs swarmed the block, searching for the matriarch of the Rousseau family. Nora's feet burned. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore, just a dull, rhythmic throb radiating from the soles of her cheap orthopedic shoes up to her lower back. She had been on the floor at Café Blanc for 9 hours. The air inside smelled of roasted espresso beans, vanilla syrup, and the suffocating perfume of people who had never worried about making rent. Café Blanc was the kind of establishment that charged $12 for a pour-over and $50 for a plate of avocado toast, sprinkled with sea salt, imported from somewhere unpronounceable. The patrons were entirely uniform in their wealth. They wore perfectly tailored loungewear and stared at glowing laptop screens, loudly discussing stock portfolios, angel investments, and their winter trips to Aspen. Nora wiped down a marble counter with a damp rag. She kept her head down. Survival in the service industry required a specific type of invisibility. You had to be there the second a water glass was half empty, but you could never exist as a human being. Outside, the late November afternoon had turned ugly. The sky bruised into a deep, heavy purple, and freezing sleet began to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows. That was when the old woman fell. Nora saw it happen through the glass. The woman was small, hunched over, beneath an oversized, threadbare wool coat that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. She was pushing a metal shopping cart with a squeaky wheel, her head wrapped in a grey scarf. As she tried to navigate the icy curb right outside the cafe's front entrance, her boot slipped. She went down hard. Her cart tipped over, spilling a pathetic collection of dented cans and plastic bags onto the slush-covered sidewalk. The woman hit the concrete with a sickening thud that Nora felt more than heard. Nora stopped wiping this counter. She waited for the woman to get up. She didn't. The woman just lay there on her side, one frail hand clutching her hip, shivering violently as the freezing rain soaked through her clothes. "Oh, gross," a voice said. Nora turned. A man in his late 20s, wearing a quilted vest and a heavy Rolex, was pointing out the window. His name was Todd. He came in every Tuesday, ordered 3 lattes, and never tipped. "Is she dead?" his companion, a blonde woman in yoga pants, asked. She didn't sound concerned. She sounded annoyed. "I swear to God, this city is just letting anyone sleep on the streets now. It's a health hazard," Todd chuckled, lifting his phone. "Hold on, let me get a video for the group chat. Urban wildlife in its natural habitat." A low ripple of laughter moved through the front section of the cafe. A few people glanced over, smirked, and went back to their screens. Others purposefully turned their backs to the window, sipping their hot drinks, insulating themselves against the miserable reality just inches away on the other side of the glass. Nora looked at the old woman. The sleet was beginning to accumulate on the grey fabric of her scarf. "Hey," Nora said, her voice raspy from disuse. "She's hurt." Todd glanced over his shoulder, his phone still recording. "She's drunk, sweetheart. Just ignore it. The cops will sweep her up in an hour." Nora's jaw tightened. She looked down at the rag in her hand. She thought about her electricity bill, sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. She thought about the warning her manager David had given her last week about her lack of a cheerful disposition. She threw the wet rag onto the marble counter. It landed with a wet slap. "Nora!" David barked from the espresso machine. He was a tightly wound man with a heavily gelled comb-over. "Table 4 needs their macchiatos. Now." "I need a minute," Nora said. "You don't get a minute." Nora ignored him. She bypassed the service counter, untying her apron. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the freezing wind. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The sleet bit into her bare arms, instantly soaking through her thin cotton uniform shirt. She jogged over to the curb and dropped to her knees in the slush beside the old woman. "Mom," Nora asked, keeping her voice low, "can you hear me?" The woman groaned. Up close, her face was a map of deep, weathered lines. Her skin was pale, blue around the lips. She wasn't drunk. She smelled like peppermint and old paper, not alcohol. "My hip," the woman rasped, her accent thick, though Nora couldn't place it. Italian maybe, or Greek. "Ice. I know. It's freezing. We have to get you off the ground." Nora hooked her arms under the woman's armpits. It was shocking how light she was. It felt like lifting a bundle of dry twigs. Nora gritted her teeth, ignoring the sharp protest of her own exhausted muscles, and hoisted the woman upright. Inside the cafe, Nora could see Todd and his friends pointing. Someone was definitely filming her. They were laughing. The irony of a minimum wage waitress ruining her clothes to save a homeless woman was premium entertainment for people who had nothing real to worry about. "Lean on me," Nora instructed. She half carried, half dragged the old woman through the front doors of Café Blanc. As they crossed the threshold, the warm air of the restaurant enveloped them, but it didn't thaw the icy silence that fell over the room. The laughter died. Disgust replaced it. "What the hell are you doing?" David shouted, abandoning the espresso machine. He marched across the dining floor, his face flushing dark red. "You cannot bring her in here. Look at her! She's tracking mud all over the imported tile." "She's freezing, David," Nora said, not stopping. She steered the woman toward an empty booth in the back corner. "I don't care if she's turning to ice. This is a luxury establishment. Get her out of here before you ruin my lunch rush." Nora lowered the old woman onto the plush leather bench. She looked up at David, her expression entirely devoid of whatever customer service mask she usually wore. "Call an ambulance, then." "I'm calling the police," David snapped. "Fine, call them. But she sits here until they arrive." Nora turned her back on her manager. She grabbed a stack of clean linen napkins from a nearby service station and began gently dabbing the freezing moisture from the old woman's face and neck. The old woman reached up, her hand, trembling and cold, wrapped around Nora's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You are a good girl," the old woman whispered. Nora forced a tired half-smile. "I'm really not. But I'm not going to let you freeze to death while some tech bro films it for TikTok." David didn't call the police. He knew the optics of dragging a freezing old woman out of a cafe would eventually look bad for business, even if his current clientele found her repulsive. Instead, he stormed into his back office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pastry display. Nora knew what the slammed door meant. It meant she was done. She ignored the staring patrons. She walked over to the soup station, poured a large bowl of the overpriced minestrone, grabbed a fresh baguette, and carried it back to the corner booth. "Here," Nora said, sliding the bowl across the table. "Eat it slow, it'll warm you up." The old woman looked down at the soup, then up at Nora. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and shockingly lucid. There was no dementia there, no confusion, just a sharp, calculating intelligence that made Nora suddenly feel like she was the one being evaluated. "They are looking at us," the old woman said softly, picking up the heavy silver spoon. "Let them look," Nora said, sliding into the booth opposite her. She crossed her arms, shivering in her damp shirt. "They don't have anything better to do." The old woman took a slow sip of the broth. She didn't slurp. Despite the oversized, ragged coat, she ate with a precise, rigid etiquette. She dabbed her mouth with the linen napkin. "That man!" The old woman gestured with her chin toward the back office. "Your boss. He is angry." "He's an idiot," Nora corrected mildly. "But yes, he's angry. He will fire you for this." Nora leaned her head back against the leather booth and stared at the ceiling. The cynical exhaustion settled deep in her bones. "Yeah, he will. It's fine. I've been fired by worse people for less. You need this job." It wasn't a question. Nora let out a dry, humorless laugh. Everyone needs their job, unless you're sitting at table 4 trading crypto. But I'll find another one. People always need their tables wiped down. The old woman set the spoon down. She folded her hands on the table. For the first time, Nora noticed the ring on the woman's right index finger. It was gold, heavy, and worn smooth with age. It didn't look like something you found in a thrift store. It looked like an heirloom. "Why did you come out for me?" the old woman asked. Nora frowned. "You fell." "Many people fall. Nobody came." "People are garbage," Nora said flatly. "I don't know. Maybe I just didn't want to watch you die while Todd over there laughed about it. It's not that deep. Don't make me out to be a saint. I'm just tired of everyone being so damn mean." The old woman's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Mean? Yes, the world is very mean. People forget that fortunes change. They forget that the hand that holds the cup today might beg for coins tomorrow." She tilted her head, her dark eyes locking onto Nora's. "And sometimes, the beggar is just resting." Before Nora could pass what that meant, the office door flew open. David marched out, holding a small white envelope. He walked straight to the booth and slammed it on the table next to the soup. "Your final check," David said, his voice clipped. "Prorated for the hours you worked today. I want your apron, your name tag, and I want you out of my restaurant in 5 minutes." Nora looked at the envelope. She didn't flinch. She just felt a hollow cavern open up in her stomach. Rent was due in 4 days. "Fine," Nora said, keeping her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "And take her with you," David sneered, pointing a manicured finger at the old woman. "Before I have her arrested for trespassing." The old woman didn't look at David. She continued to look at Nora. "He barks very loudly, your little manager." David bristled, his face reddening again. "Excuse me? Listen, you crazy old—" "David," Nora interrupted, standing up. She was taller than him, and she used it. "Shut up, I'm leaving. Give her 5 minutes to finish her soup. She's not hurting anyone." "She's hurting my brand," David hissed. Nora untied her apron, pulled it over her head, and let it drop onto the floor right onto David's expensive leather shoes. She reached up, unclipped her plastic name tag, and flicked it onto the table. "Your brand," Nora said, "is overpriced garbage for people who hate themselves. Keep the apron." Nora turned to the old woman. "Finish your food. Stay warm. If he touches you, scream." She didn't wait for a response. Nora walked away, her wet shoes squeaking on the tile, heading toward the employee locker room in the back. Behind her, she could hear Todd and his table snickering. Someone offered a slow, sarcastic clap. In the cramped, bleach-scented locker room, Nora opened her metal door. She grabbed her heavy winter coat, her scarf, and her worn canvas tote bag. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from the cold anymore, but from the sudden, terrifying free-fall of unemployment. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the locker. "Pull it together," she whispered to herself. "Cry on the train. Not here." She took a deep breath, shoved her arms into her coat, and turned to leave. That was when the music in the cafe abruptly cut off. It wasn't faded down. It was killed. 1 second, soft French jazz was playing. The next, dead silence. Nora froze. The kind of silence that had just fallen over the dining room wasn't normal. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. The sound of dozens of people simultaneously stopping breathing. Then came the sound of the front door opening. Not just opening, being thrown open so violently that the brass handle cracked against the glass partition. Heavy footsteps, multiple pairs. Nora stepped out of the locker room and peered down the narrow hallway that led to the main floor. 4 matte black SUVs had jumped the curb outside Café Blanc, parking at aggressive angles that completely blocked traffic. The hazard lights blinked in unison, casting harsh orange reflections against the sleet-streaked windows. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere had shifted from pretentious relaxation to absolute terror. 5 men had entered. They didn't look like cops, and they certainly didn't look like cafe patrons. They wore dark, meticulously tailored suits under long, dark wool overcoats. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace. They didn't draw weapons, but their hands rested casually near their waistbands in a way that screamed violence. The patrons were frozen. Todd, the crypto bro who had been laughing earlier, sat with his phone suspended in the air, his mouth slightly open. His latte had tipped over, pooling across the table, but he didn't dare move to wipe it up. At the center of the men stood a man who pulled the air out of the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and terrifyingly still. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nora made in a year. His dark hair was swept back, silvering at the temples. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, dominated by dark, dead eyes, and a nose that had been broken and reset slightly off-center. Vincent Russo did not look angry. He looked entirely hollowed out, which was infinitely worse. David, the manager, was standing near the espresso machine, trembling so hard he looked like he might vibrate through the floorboards. Vincent didn't look at David. He didn't look at Todd. He swept his gaze across the room, past the marble counters, past the terrified affluent patrons, until his eyes landed on the back corner booth. The old woman was still sitting there. She was calmly eating her minestrone. Vincent let out a long, slow breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. He walked across the cafe floor. His leather shoes made sharp, echoing clicks against the tile. His men spread out, flanking the room, blocking the exit. No one was leaving. Vincent reached the booth. He stood looking down at the old woman. "Ma," Vincent said. His voice was a low, rough rumble. It wasn't a question. The old woman, Rosa, finished chewing a piece of carrot. She swallowed, dabbed her mouth with the linen napkin, and looked up at him. "You took your time, Vincenzo," Rosa said. Her voice carried clearly in the silent room. Vincent dropped to one knee, ignoring the slush on the floor that stained his trousers. He took his mother's frail, wrinkled hand in his large, scarred ones. "I'm sorry. We lost the tracker on the car. When your driver didn't check in, I thought." He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Are you hurt?" "I slipped," Rosa said dismissively. "My hip aches, and I am cold, but I am not broken." "Who left you in the street?" Vincent asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rosa calmly turned her head. She pointed a solitary finger toward Todd and his table. "Those ones," Rosa said clearly. "They watched me fall. They called me an animal. They recorded me on their telephones for amusement." Vincent slowly stood up. He didn't turn to look at Todd immediately. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch. Todd made a sound that was half whimper, half gasp. "Hey, man," Todd stammered, raising his hands. "We didn't know. I swear to God, we thought she was just we didn't know she was with you." Vincent finally turned. He looked at Todd the way a man looks at an insect before stepping on it. "If you knew she was my mother, you would have helped her," Vincent said, his voice a soft, terrifying rasp. "But because you thought she was nobody, you laughed." Todd swallowed hard, his face paper white. Vincent snapped his fingers once. 2 of the men in suits moved. They didn't run. They walked deliberately toward Todd's booth. Todd's companion, the blonde woman, burst into tears and shrank against the window. One of the men calmly reached out, took Todd's phone from his trembling hand, dropped it on the floor, and crushed it beneath his heel. The crunch of glass was deafening. "You are going to sit there," the man in the suit whispered to Todd, leaning in close. And you are not going to move until we leave." Todd nodded frantically, tears welling in his eyes. Vincent turned back to his mother. "And the one who brought you inside?" Rosa smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile. She pointed toward the back hallway. Nora was standing there, her coat clutched tight around her. She wanted to run, but her feet were glued to the floor. Vincent Russo turned his heavy, dark gaze upon her. He walked toward her. The crowd parted instantly, leaving a clear path. Nora backed up slightly, her shoulders hitting the wall. Up close, Vincent was massive. The smell of cold rain and expensive cologne rolled off him. He stopped 2 feet away, looking down at her. He took in her cheap, wet shoes, her shivering frame. her worn coat. "You," Vincent said softly. "I just helped her up," Nora said quickly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound cynical and detached. "That's it. I didn't want a reward." "You lost your job for it," Rosa called out from the booth. Vincent's eyes flicked to the side, landing on David. The manager whimpered aloud, shrinking back against the pastry case. Vincent looked back at Nora. He reached into his coat pocket. Nora flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a gun. Instead, a thick, warm material was draped over her shoulders. She opened her eyes. Vincent had removed his cashmere overcoat and wrapped it around her. It was heavy, radiating heat, instantly cutting through the deep chill in her bones. "You didn't look away," Vincent said, staring intensely into her eyes. The deadness in his gaze had fractured, revealing something raw and fiercely protective underneath. "In a room full of cowards, you did not look away from my mother." Nora pulled the coat tighter around herself, bewildered. It was just basic human decency. "Human decency is rare," Vincent murmured, stepping back. He gestured to the door. "Come with us." Nora blinked. "What? No, I'm going home." Vincent offered a small, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss, I am not in the habit of owing debts, and I certainly do not leave the people who protect my blood to walk home in the sleet unemployed." He held out a hand toward the door. "Please, let me drive you." Nora looked at David, who was practically hyperventilating. She looked at Todd, who was weeping silently over his shattered phone. And then she looked at Rosa, who gave her a single, firm nod. Nora sighed, a cynical smirk finally breaking through her shock. "Fine, but I don't sit in the middle." The interior of the SUV smelled like expensive leather and gunpowder. The heater was running full blast, blowing hot, dry air over Nora's freezing legs. She sat in the back seat, practically swallowed whole by Vincent Russo's heavy cashmere overcoat. Rosa sat beside her, resting her head against the tinted glass. A thick wool blanket had materialized from somewhere in the trunk, and she was tightly wrapped in it. In the front, a driver with a thick neck and a cauliflower ear navigated the slick, sleet-covered streets with aggressive precision. Vincent sat in the passenger seat. He didn't turn around. He was typing on a matte black phone, his thumbs moving in sharp, angry bursts. Nora stared out the window. The city blurred past, grey and miserable. She calculated the remaining balance in her checking account. $42. Rent was $800. She had exactly 4 days to perform a financial miracle, and instead, she was riding in a mobile fortress with a syndicate boss. "My apartment is on 43rd and Elm," Nora said, breaking the heavy silence. "You can just drop me at the corner. There's a bodega. I need to buy cheap wine." Vincent didn't stop typing. "We are going to the estate first. The doctor is waiting for my mother. Once she is cleared, Leah will take you wherever you wish to go." "I don't need to go to an estate," Nora argued, exhaustion making her reckless. "I need to go home. I'm wet. My feet hurt, and I have to start looking through Craigslist for a job that doesn't involve serving lattes to sociopaths." Vincent stopped typing. He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes catching her reflection in the rearview mirror. "You are cold because you gave your warmth to my mother," Vincent said flatly. "You are unemployed because you defended her. You will come to the house. You will drink something hot. You will be compensated for your trouble. I do not negotiate debts, Miss." "Nora," she sighed, leaning her head back against the leather. "And it's not a debt. It was gravity. She fell. I picked her up. End of transaction." Rosa chuckled softly beside her, a dry, raspy sound. "She is stubborn, Vincenzo. Like your sister." "My sister is a headache, Ma," Vincent replied, turning back to the windshield. "This one is just proud." They drove out of the commercial district, the high-rise glass buildings giving way to older, heavier architecture. The SUV turned onto a private, tree-lined street bordered by high iron gates. The sleet was turning into thick, wet snow, sticking to the wrought iron and the bare branches of the oaks. The vehicle rolled to a stop in front of a massive, fortified limestone brownstone. The front door opened before the engine even cut off. 2 men in dark clothes jogged down the steps, carrying a medical bag and a wheelchair. Vincent was out of the car in a flash. He opened the rear door, blocking the biting wind with his broad frame, and gently helped his mother into the chair. Nora sat awkwardly in the back seat, clutching the enormous coat. She watched the organized chaos. Men spoke in low, urgent Italian. Rosa was wheeled up the ramp and into the warm, yellow light of the foyer. Vincent turned back to the SUV. He looked at Nora. "Are you going to sit there until you freeze?" Vincent asked, his voice deadpan. "Or are you going to come inside?" "If I come inside, am I going to be murdered?" Nora asked dryly. Vincent stared at her. For a fraction of a second, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was barely there, a ghost of a smile, but it changed his entire face. The hollowness vanished, replaced by something dangerously human. "If I wanted you dead, Nora, I would have left you with David," Vincent said. He extended a large, scarred hand. "Come inside." Nora looked at his hand. She didn't take it. She slid across the leather seat, stepped out into the slush on her own 2 feet, and walked past him up the stairs. The inside of the brownstone did not look like a mobster's palace. There was no gold leaf, no velvet ropes, no gaudy statues. It looked like an old library. Dark mahogany walls lined with thousands of books. Persian rugs worn soft by decades of footsteps. The air smelled of cedarwood, espresso, and old paper. A quiet woman in a grey dress brought Nora a pair of thick wool socks and a cup of black tea. Nora took them into a first-floor bathroom, peeled off her soaked orthopedic shoes and wet socks, and dragged the dry wool over her freezing toes. She kept Vincent's coat on. It was too warm to give up just yet. When she stepped back out into the hallway, Vincent was waiting. He had shed his suit jacket, revealing a dark, grey dress shirt and a black shoulder holster strapped tight across his ribs. The gun resting in the leather pouch was a harsh, heavy piece of metal. He didn't bother trying to hide it. "The doctor says it is a severe contusion," Vincent said, holding a glass of amber liquid. "No fracture. She is resting." "Good," Nora said, sipping her tea. The heat radiated down her throat, easing the shivers. "Then I'll go." "My office," Vincent said, turning on his heel. He didn't look back to see if she followed. He just expected it. Nora rolled her eyes, her wool socks slipping slightly on the polished hardwood, and followed him down a short corridor into a dimly lit room. A massive oak desk dominated the space. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a high-walled courtyard filled with snow-covered statues. Vincent didn't sit behind the desk. He leaned against the front edge of it, crossing his ankles. He reached behind him, picked up a thick manila envelope, and tossed it onto the dark wood. It landed with a heavy, muted thud. Nora looked at the envelope. She knew exactly what it was. "There is $50,000 in that envelope," Vincent said. His tone was entirely conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "It is yours, tax-free, a token of gratitude from the Russo family." Nora stared at the package. $50,000. It was a staggering amount of money. It was rent for 5 years. It was groceries, new shoes, a winter coat of her own. It was a ticket out of the grinding, soul-crushing poverty that kept her awake at night staring at the ceiling. She walked over to the desk. She reached out and placed her hand flat on the manila envelope. The paper was smooth. Then she slid it back across the desk until it bumped against Vincent's hip. Vincent looked down at the envelope, then up at her. His brow furrowed. "Is it not enough?" "It's a lottery ticket," Nora said, stepping back. "I didn't enter a lottery. I helped an old lady who slipped on the ice. If you want to pay me for my time, I make $14 an hour. I lost about 5 hours of my shift today. You owe me $70. Give me 100 and we'll call it a generous tip. Vincent tilted his head. He studied her. He looked at the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap fabric of her uniform shirt peeking out from beneath his coat, the defiant set of her jaw. You are broke, Vincent stated. It wasn't an insult, it was an observation. Your shoes are falling apart. You fought with your manager over a job you clearly hate because you desperately need the paycheck. Do not play the proud martyr with me, Nora. Take the money. No, Nora said stubbornly, because if I take 50 grand from a guy with a gun strapped to his chest, I owe him. And I don't owe anyone. Ever. Vincent's eyes darkened. He set his glass down. He took a step toward her, closing the distance until he was looking down into her face. The smell of his cologne, bergamot, and smoke was intoxicating. You think I am trying to buy you? Vincent asked, his voice a low rumble. I think you're trying to buy a clear conscience, Nora shot back, not backing down. You weren't there to protect your mother. I was. You feel guilty. Giving me a brick of cash makes you feel like you handled it. Keep your money, Vincent. Just give me a ride to the bodega. Silence stretched between them. It was thick, heavy, and crackling with an electric tension. Vincent stared at her mouth, then up to her eyes. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted his money, his favor, or his life. He had never met someone who just wanted $70 and a ride home. Suddenly, Vincent reached into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek silver money clip, peeled off a single, crisp $100 bill, and held it out. Nora took it. She folded it neatly and put it in her jeans pocket. Thank you. You need a job, Vincent said. I'll find one. Trattoria Alba, on 9th and Mercer, Vincent said, stepping back and leaning against the desk again. It is a restaurant, real food. No foam, no sea salt from the Himalayas. They need a front-of-house manager. Nora crossed her arms. Do you own it? I own the building. A man named Carmine runs the kitchen. He is a genius with garlic and a tyrant with the waitstaff. He fired his manager yesterday because she let a pot of sauce burn. Vincent picked up a pen and wrote a name on a piece of heavy cardstock. Go there tomorrow at 4. Tell him Vincenzo sent you. I don't know anything about managing a real restaurant, Nora said, looking at the card. You know how to stand your ground against an idiot, Vincent said, sliding the card across the desk. Carmine respects a spine. You have one. The pay is $80,000 a year. Health insurance. 2 weeks paid leave. Nora's breath hitched. That wasn't a handout. That was a lifeline, but it required work. It was something she could earn. She reached out and picked up the card. If this Carmine guy yells at me, I'm going to yell back. Vincent finally smiled. It was a real smile this time, sharp and genuine, flashing white teeth against his dark stubble. I am counting on it. Keep the coat, Nora. It looks better on you anyway. Trattoria Alba was loud. It smelled aggressively of roasted garlic, crushed tomatoes, and fresh basil. The walls were exposed red brick, the tables were covered in heavy white linen, and the kitchen was an open theatre of chaos. Nora had been working there for 3 weeks. Her feet still hurt, but she had bought new, expensive orthopedic inserts with her first paycheck. Carmine, the head chef, was exactly as Vincent had described. A balding, barrel-chested man who screamed in Italian when a dish was sent back. But he also made her a plate of fresh carbonara every night before she locked up, sliding it across the pass without a word. She was good at the job. Managing the floor was easy, compared to navigating the emotional landmines of wealthy cafe patrons. Here, people came to eat, drink heavy red wine, and be loud. If someone got out of hand, Nora didn't have to smile and apologize. She just told them to sit down or leave. It was a Friday night. The dinner rush was finally slowing down. Nora was standing at the host stand, reviewing the reservation book, wiping a smear of marinara off her black dress shirt. The bell above the heavy wooden door chimed. Nora looked up with a standard greeting on her lips, but the words died in her throat. Vincent Russo walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight. He wore a dark, heavy Henley that stretched tight across his chest and dark jeans. He looked rugged, exhausted, and incredibly out of place among the laughing families and couples eating pasta. The noise in the front section of the restaurant dipped slightly. People recognized him, or if they didn't know his name, they recognized the apex predator energy he carried into the room. Nora sighed, closing the reservation book. She grabbed a menu and walked over to him. "You're scaring the tourists," Nora said, stopping in front of him. Vincent looked down at her. The harsh lines of his face softened instantly. "I didn't say a word. You don't have to. You broadcast a high-frequency signal of impending violence. Table for one? I am not hungry. Then why are you here?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. He looked around the bustling restaurant, watching the waiters carry heavy trays of food. Then he looked back at Nora. He noted the flour dusted on her sleeve, the flush in her cheeks from the heat of the kitchen, the way her hair had escaped its messy bun. "My mother asked about you," Vincent said finally. Nora raised an eyebrow. "Rosa has my phone number. She called me on Tuesday to tell me I need to eat more iron." Vincent frowned. "She called you?" "Yes. We talked about soap operas for 20 minutes. So, try again, Vincent. Why are you here?" A waiter squeezed past them, nearly bumping into Vincent. Vincent stepped out of the way, moving closer to Nora. He was close enough that she could smell the cold city air clinging to his clothes. "I had a bad day," Vincent said. The confession was so quiet, so devoid of his usual commanding presence, that it caught Nora completely off guard. She looked up at him, really looked at him. There were dark bruises under his eyes. His knuckles, resting loosely by his sides, were split and scabbing. Whatever a bad day meant in his world, it wasn't a burnt pot of sauce or a missed deadline. It was blood. It was survival. Nora's cynical armor cracked, just a fraction. "Come here," she said softly. She turned and walked past the bar, leading him to a small, secluded two-top table, tucked away in a dark corner near the wine cellar. It was where she sat to do payroll. It was out of sight from the main dining room. Vincent sat down in the heavy wooden chair. He looked massive in the small space. He rested his forearms on the table, staring at the flickering tea light in the center. Nora didn't ask what happened. She knew better than to ask a man like him for details she couldn't handle. Instead, she walked to the bar, poured a generous measure of top-shelf bourbon into a heavy glass, and walked back. She set the glass down in front of him. "Drink," Nora commanded. Vincent picked up the glass. He didn't throw it back. He took a slow, measured sip, closing his eyes as the alcohol burned its way down his throat. When he opened them again, the deadness was receding. Nora pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. She rested her chin in her hand, studying him. "You look like hell," Nora said. "I feel like hell," Vincent admitted, his voice rough. He traced the rim of the glass with his thumb. "There are people who want to take what belongs to my family. Today, we had to explain to them why that is a mistake." Did they listen? Eventually, Nora let out a slow breath. The reality of who he was sat heavy in the space between them. She was a civilian. She worried about health insurance and paying for electricity. He worried about turf wars and bleeding out in an alley. It was insane to sit here with him. It was dangerous. "You shouldn't come here when you're like this," Nora said quietly. Vincent looked up. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Where else would I go, Nora?" Vincent asked. "Every room I walk into, people want something from me. They want my protection, my money, or my head. This is the only place in the city where someone looks at me and just sees a man taking up too much space." Nora swallowed hard. The raw honesty in his voice was a weapon she didn't know how to defend against. "I see a guy who needs to put some ice on his knuckles," Nora deflected, pointing at his hands. Vincent looked down at his bruised hands. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "Carmine has ice in the back! Carmine is currently screaming at a line cook because the veal is tough. I'll get it." Nora stood up. But before she could turn away, Vincent reached out, his large hand wrapped gently around her wrist. His touch was warm, heavy, and grounding. "Nora," he said softly. She looked down at him. "Yeah? Thank you. For the bourbon? For not looking away." Nora pulled her wrist back, though it took more effort than she cared to admit. She grabbed an empty water pitcher from the neighboring table. "Don't get used to it, Russo," Nora said, walking toward the kitchen. "I still charge $14 an hour for therapy." Vincent watched her walk away. He leaned back in his chair, picking up the bourbon. For the first time in 48 hours, his chest didn't feel like it was caught in a vice. He took another sip. He was going to spend a lot of time at this restaurant. Winter broke, giving way to a muddy grey spring, but Vincent Russo's routine did not change. 2 nights a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays, the black SUV would idle in the alley behind Trattoria Alba. Vincent would come through the heavy steel kitchen door, nodding to Carmine, who would grunt in acknowledgement without looking up from his sizzling pans of garlic and oil. Vincent never sat in the main dining room. He always took the small two-top table near the wine cellar. It became an unspoken rule among the staff. Table 12 was permanently reserved, and nobody waited on the man in the dark clothes except the manager. Nora didn't coddle him. When he looked exhausted, she brought him strong espresso and a plate of whatever heavy pasta Carmine was testing that night. When he looked agitated, carrying the violent tension of his daytime life in the tight set of his jaw, she brought him the top-shelf bourbon and left him alone to stare at the flickering tea light. They rarely talked about his business. Nora didn't want to know the names of the people who put the bruises on his knuckles or the cuts on his jawline. Ignorance was a very practical form of self-preservation. Instead, they talked about the mundane. "The linen supplier is trying to upcharge us again," Nora said one Thursday night in late April, dropping a stack of invoices onto the table across from him. She pulled out her chair and sat heavily, kicking off one orthopedic shoe under the table to rub her aching arch. "He thinks because I'm a woman, I don't know the market rate for high thread count napkins." Vincent slowly chewed a bite of braised short rib. He swallowed, wiping his mouth with a crisp white napkin. "Give me his name. Leo will pay him a visit tomorrow." "No," Nora snapped, pointing a pen at him. "You don't get to send your goons to threaten my linen guy. I handle my own vendors." "It is not a threat," Vincent replied calmly. "It is a renegotiation of terms. People are more reasonable when they understand the consequences of greed. Normal people renegotiate with phone calls and strongly worded emails, Vincent, not heavily armed men in leather jackets." Nora sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'll call him tomorrow. I just wanted to complain." Vincent leaned back, a faint glimmer of amusement in his dark eyes. "You complain often, Nora." "It's my primary coping mechanism. You should try it sometime instead of just bottling everything up until you look like you're going to punch a hole through a brick wall." Vincent looked down at his glass. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. "If I complain, people assume I am weak. If I am weak, people try to take what is mine. It is a very simple ecosystem." Nora watched him. The hollow look in his eyes that she had seen on that first day at the cafe was mostly gone, replaced by a weary, heavy vigilance. He was a man holding up a crumbling ceiling, terrified that if he shifted his weight, the whole structure would collapse and crush his family. "How is Rosa?" Nora asked, softening her tone. "She is well. She wants you to come for Sunday dinner, again." Nora grimaced. Rosa had invited her to the Russo estate for Sunday dinner 3 times in the last month. Nora had politely declined every single one. The idea of sitting at a massive mahogany table surrounded by made men and mafia associates terrified her. She liked Vincent in this controlled environment, tucked away in her restaurant where she was in charge. Out there, in his world, she would be completely defenseless. "Tell her I'm working," Nora lied. "Trattoria Alba is closed on Sundays," Vincent pointed out smoothly. "Tell her I'm doing inventory." "She knows you do inventory on Monday mornings," she asked Carmine. Nora scowled toward the kitchen. "Carmine is a traitor." "Carmine respects my mother," Vincent corrected. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The proximity made the air between them feel suddenly very dense. She just wants to feed you, Nora. You saved her from a great humiliation on the street. To a woman like my mother, that is a debt of honor that requires a lifetime of baked ziti to repay. I don't want baked ziti, Nora muttered, looking away from his intense gaze. What do you want? The question wasn't about pasta. It hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Vincent was looking at her mouth, then up to her eyes. The space between them had been shrinking for months, a slow, agonizing crawl of stolen glances and quiet conversations in the dark corner of the restaurant. Nora swallowed hard. I want to finish these invoices, and I want to go home and sleep for 12 hours. Vincent held her gaze for a long moment. He didn't push. He never pushed. He just nodded slowly, finishing his bourbon. Good night, Nora. He left money on the table, always too much, and walked out the back door into the spring rain. Nora sat alone at the table for a long time, staring at the empty glass, wishing her heart wasn't hammering so violently against her ribs. The problem with allowing a predator to sleep on your porch is that eventually other predators come looking for him. It was a Tuesday night in early May. The restaurant was closed, the chairs were flipped upside down on the tables, and the smell of bleach and floor wax had replaced the heavy aroma of garlic and wine. The kitchen staff had left an hour ago. Nora was alone in the small office near the back alley, finishing the weekly payroll. Vincent wasn't coming tonight. He had sent a brief cryptic text earlier in the day, business out of town. Lock the doors tight. She heard the glass shatter before she heard the footsteps. It was a sharp, explosive sound from the front of the house. Nora froze. Her hand hovered over the adding machine. For a second, she tried to convince herself that a shelf in the bar had collapsed. Then came the heavy thud of boots on the hardwood floor. Multiple pairs. Nora quietly stood up. She didn't have a weapon. This was a restaurant, not an armory. She crept to the office door and peered out into the dim hallway that led to the main dining room. 3 men were standing by the hostess stand. The heavy glass of the front door was entirely spiderwebbed, a jagged hole smashed right near the deadbolt. They weren't Vincent's men. Vincent's men wore expensive suits and moved with a terrifying, silent discipline. These men wore heavy leather coats, work boots, and carried themselves with a sloppy, aggressive swagger. But the man in the middle, a thick-necked bruiser with a jagged scar running down his cheek, was casually kicking a wooden chair across the floor. "Hello?" The scarred man called out, his voice echoing in the empty restaurant. "Anybody home? We heard the food here was fantastic. Wanted a late-night snack." Nora's blood ran cold. She backed into the office and grabbed her cell phone from the desk. Her fingers shook as she unlocked it. She didn't dial 911. The police would take 10 minutes. These men would take 10 seconds. She opened her contacts and hit Vincent's name. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Nora cursed silently. She shoved the phone into her jeans pocket. She looked around the office. A heavy brass letter opener sat on the desk. It was pathetic, but it was better than nothing. She gripped it tight, the metal cold against her sweating palm. "Hey, manager lady!" the scarred man yelled. The heavy footsteps were moving down the hallway, heading toward the back. "We know you're here. Carmine's car is gone, but yours is in the alley. Come on out. We just want to talk about our mutual friend, the one who likes table 12. They knew about Vincent. They knew he came here. Panic threatened to choke her, but Nora clamped down on it. Panic got you killed. Anger, however, kept you moving. She had spent her entire life scraping by, fighting for every inch, refusing to be a victim to bad managers, bad landlords, and a bad economy. She wasn't about to cower under a desk for some low-level street thugs. Nora stepped out of the office and into the hallway. The 3 men stopped. The scarred man grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "There she is," he said, spreading his arms. "Nora, right? Word on the street is Russo is very fond of this little Italian joint. Very fond of the woman running it too." "The restaurant is closed," Nora said. Her voice was remarkably steady, though her knees felt like water. "You need to leave. Now." The men laughed. The scarred man took a step closer, pulling a short, heavy crowbar from inside his leather coat. "See, we got a problem with Russo," the man said, tapping the crowbar against his palm. "He took something from my boss, a very lucrative shipping contract down at the docks. We want it back, but Russo is a hard man to get a meeting with. So we figured we'd come here, smash up his favorite little toy, maybe break a few of your fingers, and leave a message." "I don't know anything about shipping contracts," Nora said, backing up slowly toward the kitchen. "I just serve food. You're wasting your time." "Breaking things is never a waste of time," the man sneered. He lunged forward, swinging the crowbar at a framed mirror on the wall. The glass exploded, raining down onto the floor. Nora flinched, raising her arms to shield her face. The scarred man laughed, stepping over the broken glass, raising the crowbar towards her. "Let's see how much he cares when he finds you." The heavy steel door at the back of the kitchen burst open with the force of a bomb. It slammed against the brick wall so hard the hinges shrieked. The scarred man spun around, raising his crowbar. Vincent Russo stood in the doorway. He didn't look tired tonight. He looked like a nightmare made of flesh and bone. He was soaked in rain, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were entirely black, devoid of anything remotely human. He didn't have his gun drawn. He didn't need it. "Costa," Vincent said. The name tasted like poison in his mouth. The scarred man, Costa, took a step back, the arrogant swagger instantly draining from his posture. "Russo, we were just leaving a message for you." "The message is received," Vincent said, his voice a terrifying quiet whisper. He moved. Nora had never seen violence like it. It wasn't like the movies. There was no witty banter, no prolonged choreography. It was brutal, efficient, and horrifyingly fast. Vincent closed the distance in 2 massive strides. Costa swung the crowbar. Vincent didn't even try to dodge it. He took the glancing blow off his heavy shoulder, grabbed Costa by the throat, and slammed him backward into the stainless steel prep counter. The sound of Costa's skull hitting the metal was sickening. The other 2 men panicked. One reached for a gun at his waistband, but before he could clear the leather, Vincent spun, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. He swung it like a baseball bat, catching the man squarely in the jaw. The man collapsed like a string-cut puppet, blood spraying across the white tile. The third man didn't fight. He turned and bolted down the hallway, slipping on the wet floor, scrambling out the smashed front door into the night. Vincent didn't chase him. He turned back to Costa, who was sliding down the front of the prep counter, gasping for air, his eyes rolling back in his head. Vincent reached down, grabbed Costa by the lapels of his leather coat, and hauled him back to his feet. He pulled his heavy pistol from his shoulder holster and jammed the barrel directly under Costa's chin. "Look at me!" Vincent growled, his face inches from the bleeding man. Costa whimpered, his hands weakly grasping at Vincent's wrists. "Tell your boss," Vincent whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal cadence, "that if he ever sends men to this block again, if anyone even looks at this building, I will not come for his contracts. I will come for his breathing. Do you understand?" Costa nodded frantically, choking on his own blood. Vincent released him. Costa crumpled to the floor, crawling desperately toward the back door, dragging himself out into the rainy alleyway. The kitchen was dead silent, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the unconscious man bleeding on the floor, and the rain pouring through the open back door. Vincent stood in the center of the kitchen, his chest heaving. His knuckles were bleeding again. He slowly holstered his weapon. He didn't turn around to look at Nora. "Are you hurt?" Vincent asked. His voice was completely stripped of emotion. Nora was pressed against the wall, the brass letter opener still clutched in her hand. Her heart was beating so fast it physically hurt her chest. She looked at the blood on the floor, at the dented cast-iron skillet, at the man who had just dismantled 2 thugs with his bare hands. "No," Nora choked out. "I'm not hurt." "Good." Vincent finally turned. He looked at her. He didn't step closer. The dangerous hollow look was back in his eyes, a heavy wall slamming down between them. "Leo is outside in the alley," Vincent said flatly. "He will take you home. A crew will be here in 10 minutes to clean this up and fix the door. It will be like it never happened." He turned to walk out the back door. "Vincent," Nora called out. He stopped, standing in the doorway, the rain hitting his shoulders. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To finish the business I started," Vincent said without looking back. "I am sorry, Nora. I thought I could keep this place separate. I was wrong. I will not come back here." He stepped out into the rain. Nora did not let Leo drive her home. She sat in the office for 3 hours while a team of silent men in dark clothes scrubbed the blood off the kitchen floor, replaced the broken mirror, and installed a temporary, heavy wooden board over the shattered front door. When they were done, the restaurant smelled of bleach and fresh wood. It was exactly as Vincent said, like it never happened. Except, it did happen. Nora went home, stared at her ceiling for 4 hours, showered, put on her orthopedic shoes, and walked back to the restaurant to prep for the lunch rush. She expected fear. She expected the trauma of almost being bludgeoned by a mobster to send her packing, to force her to quit and find a quiet job in a quiet suburb far away from the Russo family. But as she chopped onions in this quiet kitchen, she didn't feel afraid. She felt angry. She was angry at the men who broke her door. She was angry at a world where violence was a currency. But mostly, she was angry at Vincent Russo for thinking he could just make decisions for her. He didn't show up on Tuesday. He didn't show up on Thursday. 2 weeks passed. Table 12 sat empty. Carmine was unusually quiet, his screaming reduced to angry, muttered Italian. The restaurant functioned. The money came in, but the air felt stagnant, heavy with an unresolved tension. On a rainy Sunday morning, Nora stood in her small apartment, looking at a stack of clean laundry. Trattoria Alba is closed on Sundays. She grabbed her coat. The Russo estate looked exactly as it had the day she first arrived, an imposing fortress of limestone and iron. Nora walked up to the heavy iron gates. A man in a dark raincoat stepped out of a guardhouse. "Can I help you, miss?" the guard asked, his eyes scanning the street behind her. "I'm here for Sunday dinner," Nora said, crossing her arms to hide the fact that her hands were shaking. "Rosa invited me." The guard frowned, pulling a walkie-talkie from his belt. He spoke quietly in Italian. A minute later, the heavy iron gates buzzed and swung open. Nora walked up the long driveway. Her cheap shoes splashed in the puddles. When she reached the front door, it was already open. Rosa stood in the foyer, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane. She wore a dark velvet dress, her white hair pulled back severely. When she saw Nora, a slow, knowing smile spread across her weathered face. "You were late," Rosa said. "I brought wine," Nora replied, handing over a cheap bottle of Chianti she had bought at the bodega. Rosa took the bottle, inspecting the label with a faint look of amusement. "Come, the food is almost ready." Nora followed the old woman through the massive house. The smell of roasting garlic, rich tomato sauce, and slow-cooked meat filled the air, replacing the sterile smell of the museum-like foyer. They entered a massive dining room. A long mahogany table was set for at least 20 people. Uncles, cousins, men with harsh faces and women in expensive jewelry were talking loudly, drinking wine, and passing heavy platters of food. At the head of the table sat Vincent. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was listening to a man next to him, his expression stoic and unreadable. When Nora walked into the room, the conversation didn't stop, but the temperature shifted. A few people glanced at her. Vincent looked up. He froze. The stoic mask cracked, shock registering clearly in his dark eyes. He looked from Nora to his mother, who was casually directing a maid to set an extra plate near the head of the table. Vincent stood up. The room quieted down a fraction. He walked around the massive table, stopping 3 feet in front of Nora. What are you doing here? Vincent asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Rosa invited me, Nora said, tipping her chin up, refusing to break eye contact. It's impolite to refuse a matriarch. It is not safe for you here, Nora. Nowhere is safe, Vincent, Nora shot back, her voice steady but carrying enough edge to make him flinch. I walked out of my apartment today and almost got hit by a bus. Life is a hazard. You don't get to decide what risks I take. Vincent looked down at her. His jaw clenched. You saw what happened in the kitchen. You saw what I am. I saw a man protect my restaurant, Nora said fiercely. I saw a man make sure I didn't get hurt. I don't care about your contracts. I don't care about your shipping lanes. But you don't get to walk into my life, give me a job, give me a coat, drink my bourbon, and then just walk away because you think you're some tragic, dangerous monster. It's arrogant, Rousseau. Silence fell over their corner of the room. A few feet away, Rosa was sipping her wine, watching them with a deeply satisfied expression. Vincent stared at Nora. He looked at the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, the complete lack of fear. She wasn't a fragile thing to be locked away. She was steel. The heavy, suffocating weight that sat on his chest every single day finally lifted. Vincent reached out. He didn't grab her wrist this time. He cupped her cheek, his thumb gently brushing across her cheekbone. His hands were calloused, still bearing the faint, yellowing bruises of his life, but his touch was incredibly gentle. You are a very stubborn woman, Vincent murmured, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. I've been told, Nora whispered, the anger draining out of her, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying sense of rightness. If you stay, Vincent warned softly, his eyes searching hers, there is no going back. My world is dark, Nora. It is cold. Nora leaned slightly into his hand. I know how to turn on the heat, and I make a very good cup of coffee. Vincent let out a long, slow breath. He dropped his hand, but he didn't step away. He turned toward the table and pulled out the chair to his right. Sit, Vincent commanded, though the harshness was entirely gone from his voice. Nora walked past him and sat down. As Vincent took his seat at the head of the table, he poured her a glass of heavy red wine. Across the table, Rosa raised her glass in a silent, approving toast. Nora picked up her glass and clinked it against Vincent's. The sound was small, but it echoed loudly over the chaos of the room. It was a promise. It was a complication. It was exactly where she was meant to be. Did this story of loyalty, grit, and unexpected love keep you on the edge of your seat? The world might be a cruel place, but sometimes standing up for the forgotten can completely change your destiny. If you loved watching Nora hold her own against the Mafia Boss, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a grounded, slow-burn romance with a protective edge. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss our next intense audio drama. What would you do in Nora's shoes? Drop a comment below